She spent 5 years building a life with a man who was already building an exit. 5 years of silence when she should have screamed, of shrinking when she should have taken up space, of loving someone who treated her heart like a liability on a balance sheet. Tonight, Vanessa Hale walked into that ballroom believing she was finally becoming his wife. She walked out of a private room knowing she was never even his choice. This is not a story about heartbreak. This is a story about what a woman becomes when everything false is finally burned away. Drop your city in the comments, and don't you dare leave before the end. The dress had taken 11 months to make. Vanessa knew the exact number because she had been there for every single consultation, every pinned seam, every afternoon in Maison Calloway's private atelier, where the lead seamstress, a small Hungarian woman named Esther, had pressed cold fingertips against Vanessa's ribs to measure how she breathed when she was nervous. Esther had said, quietly and without sentiment, that a wedding dress needed to account for the way a woman's lungs expanded under pressure, that it had to be built around fear as much as beauty, or it would never sit right on the body. Vanessa had thought that was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. That was 11 months ago. She had been a different kind of fool then, the kind who still believed that attention to detail meant love. The Cross Family Annual Engagement Gala occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Ardent Tower, which Damien owned outright, the same way he owned everything in this city, quietly, completely, and without ever once asking if anyone else had wanted it first. 300 guests had arrived by 7. By 8, the champagne was flowing in that particular way it did at events hosted by the genuinely wealthy. Not poured exactly, but materialized, as if the glasses filled themselves out of some deep institutional obligation to excess. Vanessa had stood near the east windows for most of the first hour, watching the city below bleed its light into the dark and thinking, without quite meaning to, that cities at night looked honest in a way they never managed during the day. No performance of busyness, no careful presentation, just the raw evidence of 10,000 lives burning at once. She was wearing a deep sapphire gown, not the dress. Not yet. Damien had said they would do the formal reveal together later in the evening. And her dark hair was pinned at the nape of her neck in a style that Elena, her longtime stylist, had described as quietly devastating. Elena had meant it as a compliment. Vanessa had chosen to believe her. "You look like you're waiting for a verdict," said a voice to her left. She turned. Marcus Hale, her older brother, 2 inches shorter than their father had been, and twice as stubborn, was standing with a glass of something amber pressed loosely in one hand. He had not wanted to come tonight. He had said so 3 times in the preceding week, each time with a different flavor of concern that he was trying to package as something less alarming. "I'm fine," she said. "You've said that 6 times this month. Then you should probably stop asking." Marcus looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of someone who has made a decision not to push a door that he suspects might be locked from the inside. He lifted his glass slightly, not quite a toast. "Where's Damien?" "Networking." She said the word the way people said weather, descriptive, impersonal, carrying no opinion about what it meant for the rest of the day. "He hasn't been to your side of the room in 40 minutes. "Marcus, I'm just noting." "Don't note." He drank from his glass and looked out the window beside her. Below, a line of black cars moved along the avenue in a slow, deliberate procession that looked from 42 floors up like a ribbon being pulled through a needle. "Dad built something real," Marcus said, not quite to her, not quite to the window. "When he gave you those shares, he was trying to make sure you'd always have something that was yours." "I know what he was doing. The Hale stake in Cross Industries is not a romantic gesture. It's a life raft." "Marcus." Her voice was level. She had practiced with that. "I know what it is. I've always known what it is. I don't need you to remind me at my own engagement party." He went quiet. The silence between them had the particular texture of a conversation that had already happened a dozen times in private and was now just making a public appearance. Across the room, she could see Damien. He was standing near the bar with 2 men she recognized as board members of a shipping conglomerate he had been quietly acquiring for the past 18 months. A deal that, if it closed, would double the liquid asset column in Cross Industries' annual report. Damien was laughing at something, not the careful political laugh he used in rooms like this, the one that arrived exactly 2 seconds after the punchline, and said, "I am a man who appreciates humor without actually finding anything funny." This was a different laugh. Looser, unguarded. Vanessa had seen that laugh exactly twice before. Once when they were sailing off the coast of Corsica in the third summer of their relationship, and a wave had knocked his hat into the water. Once at 2 in the morning in his penthouse kitchen, when she had burned toast so badly that the smoke alarm screamed for 6 full minutes. She had not made him laugh like that in a long time. She hadn't fully admitted that to herself until this exact moment, standing 42 floors above the city, with her brother's concern pressing against her left shoulder like a hand trying to stop her from walking into traffic. "I'm going to find the restroom," she said. "Vanessa." "I'm fine, Marcus, I promise." She was not fine. She had known this for approximately 6 weeks, the way you know a storm is coming, not because you can see it, but because the pressure in your ears changes and the birds go quiet, and everything around you takes on a quality of held breath. She had simply made the decision, the way she had always made the decisions that hurt most, to keep walking forward until the truth ran her down, because at least then it would have been the truth's fault for moving so fast. The hallway east of the main ballroom was quieter. Her heels were quiet on the marble, the noise of the gala reduced to a soft compression of sound behind thick walls. The restrooms were around a second corner, past a row of closed doors that led to the private event suites Damien used for satellite meetings during larger functions. She had been in those rooms before. They smelled like fresh linen and the particular kind of ambition that had been laundered so many times it no longer looked like ambition. She was almost past the second door when she heard the voice. Not Damien's. A woman's. Familiar in the specific way that a sound can be familiar before you consciously place it. The rhythm of the syllables, the particular pitch of pleased self-satisfaction. Vanessa stopped. The door was not fully closed. A sliver of warm light fell across the marble in a thin gold line. She could hear the fabric shift of the conversation now, not the words yet, just the texture. Intimate, low. The acoustic signature of two people who were not concerned about being overheard because they did not believe they would be. She put one hand against the door. She would think later, in the strange, slow-motion clarity that comes after catastrophe, that she had made a choice in that moment, that she could have kept walking, that the 6 weeks of held breath had been preparation for exactly this, the chance to choose ignorance over knowledge, to fold the truth back into its envelope and carry it with her, unopened, into a marriage. She pushed the door open. The suite was long and warmly lit, a low arrangement of white flowers on a side table. 2 champagne flutes, one empty, one half full. And in the center of the room, positioned in front of a tall mirror as though the moment had been staged for maximum effect, was Celeste Vane in Vanessa's wedding dress. The dress was unmistakable. There was not another garment like it in the world. 11 months of Esther's cold fingers and whispered instructions. 43 separate fittings, 3 different versions of the bodice before they found the one that accounted for the specific way Vanessa's left shoulder sat fractionally higher than her right from a childhood riding injury. Seed pearls arranged in a pattern Vanessa had sketched herself on a piece of hotel notepad paper in Milan at 1 in the morning, laughing because she was slightly drunk and happy and had not yet learned the price of happiness in this particular life. Celeste Vane had the dress on her body, and it fit her, and she was looking at herself in the mirror with the expression of someone trying on something that had already become theirs. Damien was standing behind her, jacket off, a glass of scotch in one hand. He was watching Celeste in the mirror. His expression was the one Vanessa recognized from deal closings. A quiet, settled satisfaction, the look of a man who has acquired something and found it exactly as valuable as projected. He saw Vanessa in the mirror's reflection 1 full second before he turned. That second was important. It was long enough for Vanessa to see that he did not look surprised. He looked, and this was the part that would stay with her longer than anything else from that night, mildly inconvenienced. "Vanessa," he said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Celeste turned. For a fraction of a second, something crossed her face that might have been guilt. The shallow, reflexive kind, the kind that was really just the aesthetic performance of guilt rather than the thing itself. And then her chin lifted and her expression settled into something that was almost triumphant. if triumph could be so effortlessly bored. What is this? Vanessa did not make it a question. Her voice was quiet in a way that she recognized from her father, the particular register her father had used in boardrooms when a counterparty had misjudged him badly enough that anger had passed through its own ceiling and come out the other side as something colder. Damien set his glass on the table. You should come back to the gala. We'll talk later. You'll talk to me right now. Celeste moved to step out of the frame of the conversation, some instinct for self-preservation briefly overriding her composure, but Damien's hand went to her arm. Not grasping, just a light touch of restraint, the automatic gesture of a man accustomed to controlling the movement of the people around him. And Celeste stilled. Vanessa's eyes dropped to that hand. She had memorized those hands over 5 years. She knew the specific weight of them. She had held them across tables and on airstrips and in hospital waiting rooms when Damien's mother had taken ill 3 winters ago and he had needed something to press against to keep himself from going under. She knew those hands. They looked different on someone else's arm. That dress, she said, was made for me. Celeste has been wearing it for a fitting, Damien said. The ease in his voice was extraordinary. The specific ease of someone who has rehearsed a lie so many times it has stopped feeling like a lie and become simply another version of the truth. There's nothing to read into here. A fitting. The word came out of Vanessa's mouth with a texture she didn't recognize. Vanessa. That dress was in Maison Calloway's private vault. It was locked under my name. Esther called me personally to confirm the storage protocols. So before you tell me there's nothing to read into, Damien, you're going to need to explain to me how it got from that vault onto her body, because those are not the kind of logistics that happen by accident. Something shifted in the room. The temperature or the air pressure or just the quality of attention. That invisible calibration that happens when a conversation passes from uncomfortable into something that cannot be taken back. Damien looked at her. For one moment, one fraction of a second, she saw something in his eyes that she might, in a different life, have called remorse. Then it was gone, smoothed over by the same facility that made him exceptional at board meetings and deeply untrustworthy in rooms like this one. She looked better in it, he said. The silence after those 4 words was total. Even Celeste, who had been watching the exchange with the careful detachment of someone observing a traffic accident from a safe distance, went utterly still. Vanessa did not move. She registered the words the way you register a structural failure, not immediately as meaning, but first as sound, then as sequence, then as the full catastrophic weight of what they implied. He looked better in it. Not she asked to try it. Not it was a mistake. Not even the lie that might have been survivable if she'd had any interest in surviving it. He looked better in it. Said the way you say it about a tie, a piece of furniture, an object that had served its purpose with one person and had now been reassigned. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that. She had expected them to shake. In 5 years, she said, and her voice was so steady it frightened her, I never once took anything from you that wasn't freely given. Everything I brought into this relationship, I brought with open hands. I signed every document your lawyers put in front of me. I showed up for every event, every dinner, every breakfast where I sat across from you and watched you think about something else. I built my schedule around yours. I moved my office across the city to be closer to yours. I told my brother not to worry. I told myself not to worry. She stopped, breathed once, slowly through her nose. And you gave her my dress because she looked better in it. Damien's jaw was tight. This isn't the time. No, you don't get to tell me when the time is. She looked at Celeste. The dress in the warm light was extraordinary. Even now, even in this moment, she could see what Esther had built into every seam. The particular way the bodice moved when you breathed, the scatter of seed pearls that caught light the way ocean water did. Take it off. Celeste blinked. Excuse me. Take it off. Vanessa. Damien's voice carried a warning note that she identified without difficulty. She had heard it in negotiations, in meetings where someone had pushed too hard against something he had already decided. It was the voice that said this conversation is over in a register designed to close rooms. She looked at him and felt, clearly and without drama, the final snapping of something that had been under tension for a long time. Don't, she said. She turned and walked out of the suite. The hallway. The marble. Her own heels barely audible. She was moving before she had a plan, which was unusual for her. Vanessa Hale had operated with plans since she was 8 years old and had understood for the first time that the world did not automatically sort itself into fairness without assistance. She was the kind of woman who mapped exits before she walked into rooms, who read contracts from the signature page backward, who kept physical copies of documents that everyone else believed only existed in digital form. But right now she was moving on something older than planning, something that lived in the body rather than the mind, and did not wait for instructions. She came back into the ballroom, 300 people, the cream of the city's financial and social world, the architects and inheritors of the particular kind of power that this city organized itself around. She knew most of them by name. She had shaken the hands of most of them, attended their anniversary parties and their foundation galas, donated to their causes, smiled at their children, navigated their feuds and alliances with the careful footwork of someone who understood that social capital was as real as the other kind. They were all present and visible and doing what guests at events like this always did, performing their attendance, demonstrating their belonging. When Vanessa walked back into the room and stopped at the centerpiece table near the eastern windows, the flower arrangements were full, white roses and eucalyptus in tall crystal vases, the kind of display that cost more per table than most people spent on a month of groceries. The scissors were there because the event planner had used them earlier to trim ribbon from the signage installation and had set them on the service credenza beside the flowers. They were good scissors, long silver blades, the kind that cut cleanly. Vanessa picked them up. She was aware that people were beginning to look at her. There's a certain shift in the energy of a room when something is about to happen. Not yet visible, not yet dramatic, but present in the way a change in barometric pressure is present, felt before it is seen. Several guests near her turned. She recognized the particular quality of the attention. This was the city's elite, trained to read situations before they resolved. They could feel the edges of something. She walked back to the private suite. She did not run. She did not rush. She moved at exactly the pace she intended, which was the pace of a woman who had made a decision and was executing it. The suite door was still ajar. Damien was speaking. She could hear the low register of his voice, explanatory, the tone of a man managing a situation, when she pushed the door open. Celeste still had the dress on. Vanessa crossed the room in 4 steps and closed the scissors around the first thing she reached. The long silk train that pooled on the floor behind the skirt, the section she had spent the longest in consultation over because she had wanted something that moved with the specific quality of water, that felt alive when it followed her. The scissors cut cleanly. The sound of silk shearing was softer than she had expected, almost quiet, like a secret being cut loose. What? Celeste stepped back and the motion pulled the train through Vanessa's hand, but she already had the hem of the skirt, already had the scissors positioned, and the next cut was longer and drove through the lower panels of the skirt with the satisfying velocity of something that had been under pressure releasing. Vanessa. Damien's voice had changed register. The warning note was gone, replaced by something she could not quite classify. Not anger yet, not quite. The sound of a man who has encountered a situation outside the range of his prepared responses. Get away from her, Celeste, moving, reaching for Vanessa's arm. Don't touch me. Vanessa stepped back, and Celeste's hand missed. She kept her eyes on the dress. The bodice was next. She drove the scissors into the elaborate side seam, the seam that had taken Esther 3 afternoons to perfect, and cut upward. The stitching parted in a long, clean line. She was aware, with some peripheral part of her awareness, that the suite door was fully open now, that people from the hallway were looking in, that the muffled sound of the ballroom had changed quality in the way that crowds change when something is happening that they do not yet fully understand but can sense requires their attention. 11 months, she said. She was not speaking to either of them specifically. She was speaking the way she sometimes spoke when she was working through a problem alone, when the act of putting language around something helped her see its true shape. 11 months of fittings. I told Esther about the shoulder. I told her about the breathing. I told her I wanted a dress that felt like something I'd built myself, not something that was built at me. She cut through the pearl-seamed collar, and a cascade of seed pearls fell to the floor in a sound like light rain. I described this dress to her from a sketch I made on hotel notepad paper at 1 in the morning because I was actually happy. Do you understand what that means? Actually happy. Not performing it. Not hoping eventually I would be. Actually. She reached the back bodice. And you gave it to her because she looked better in it. The last cut was long and deliberate, from the shoulder seam all the way to the hip. The bodice opened. The dress, still technically on Celeste's body but no longer structurally coherent, sagged and lost its shape, and Celeste grabbed at the front of it to keep it from sliding. Vanessa straightened. The scissors were still in her hand. She looked at Damien. He was standing across the room, and his face had the quality she had seen once during a hostile takeover. The expression of a man recalibrating in real time, assessing damage, calculating next moves. The look she had thought, when she first saw it, was one of the most impressive things about him, the machine-like clarity of it. She saw it differently now. I want the Hale family stake in Cross Industries transferred back to my father's trust, she said. Her voice was entirely level. She was surprised, again, to discover how level it was. I want every document I've signed in the past 5 years reviewed by my own legal team, and I want the name Hale off every Cross Industries filing, correspondence, and letterhead by Friday. Damien looked at her for a long moment, the calculating stillness of him. Vanessa, he said very quietly, you should think carefully about what you're asking. I've spent 5 years thinking carefully. I think I've been careful long enough. She set the scissors on the side table. She did not slam them. She placed them with a precision that was somehow, in that context, louder than any slam. Then she walked out. The hallway was crowded now. Word had moved through the ballroom the way it always moved through rooms like this. Not announced but conducted, traveling through looks and shoulder turns and the specific tightening of attention that precedes collective witness. Guests had moved toward the eastern corridor. Several had their phones at their sides in the specific posture that meant they were not technically filming, but were very close to filming. Vanessa walked through them. She was aware of each face as she passed. Some carried the expression of concerned sympathy that she recognized as a preliminary to gossip. Some were simply stunned in the open, unlayered way of people who had genuinely not prepared for the event they had just witnessed. A few, the ones who knew Damien well, the ones who had been present at enough of his dealings to understand what they had just seen the shape of, had no expression at all, which was its own kind of statement. Marcus found her at the elevator bank. He took one look at her and said nothing, which was the most useful thing he had done all night. He simply pressed the button and stood beside her, and when the doors opened, he followed her in. The elevator descended in silence for a long time. "Your hands are shaking," he said. She looked down. He was right. They were shaking now, in the aftermath, the delayed physical response to something the body had held itself together through by sheer directed intention. Small, precise tremors, barely visible. But there. "I know," she said. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" She looked at the floor indicator. 31. 29. The city falling away beneath them. "He gave Celeste Vane my wedding dress," she said. "The one Esther built. He said she looked better in it." Marcus was quiet for 3 full floors. "And the scissors?" he said. "I made a decision about the dress." 22, 18. "Okay," Marcus said. Just that. The single syllable of a man who has made his own private assessment and chosen, for now, to keep it. The elevator opened onto the lobby. Cold marble. A doorman near the entrance who looked up as they emerged and then quickly looked away with the professional discretion of someone who has understood, from her face, that this is not a moment for greeting. The car Marcus had arrived in was at the curb. His driver, a former military man named Chen, who had worked for the Hale family for 11 years and who had, in that time, developed the specific gift of being exactly as present or absent as a situation required, opened the rear door without a word. Vanessa got in. The leather was cold. The city moved past the windows as they pulled away from the Ardent Tower, and she watched it with the sensation of watching something that had very recently been her life receding behind glass. Her phone had 17 notifications. She turned the screen face down on her knee. "Where do you want to go?" Marcus asked. "Father's house," she said. He nodded. She watched the lights. In the 5 years she had loved Damien Cross, she had learned a number of things about him that she had chosen, at various points, to file under the category of complexity rather than warning. That he did not apologize. Not ever. Not once. Not even obliquely. Not even for small things. That he referred to the people around him when he spoke of them in abstract as assets or liabilities without apparent consciousness, that these were extraordinary words for a person to use about other people. That when he had first met her at a Hale Industries gala 2 months after her father's death, he had known within the first 3 minutes of their conversation that she held the controlling family stake in a company he had been trying to acquire for 7 years. She had known he knew. She had told herself that he had asked her to dinner anyway. She had decided that people were allowed to begin in self-interest and arrive somewhere real. She had been wrong, she suspected, or she had been right about the possibility and wrong about which man she was applying it to. The car moved through the city and Vanessa looked at her hands. Steady now, the tremors gone, and thought about what she had. What she actually had when you stripped the 5 years down to their structural components. She had the Hale family stake in Cross Industries, assuming the transfer document she had signed 18 months ago had been filed in the way Damien's legal team had described, and not the other way. That was the first thing to verify. She had her father's house, which was held in trust and not subject to anything she had agreed to in the last 5 years. She had her own business, the boutique design consulting firm she had run quietly alongside the relationship. The thing she had kept small because Damien had subtly, persistently, without ever saying so explicitly, created an atmosphere in which her professional ambitions were best maintained at a scale that didn't compete for his attention. She had her brother. She had apparently some portion of pure white-hot clarity that had arrived when Damien said she looked better in it and had not yet departed. Her phone face down on her knee vibrated once, then twice, then with the sustained buzzing of a device receiving more messages than it could queue calmly. She picked it up, turned it over. The first notification was from a number she didn't recognize. The message contained a screenshot, already. Already within, 20 minutes of the ballroom as she had walked through it, the scissors in her hand visible in someone's peripheral shot, her face in profile. Something in her expression that she barely recognized as herself. The caption read, "Anyone else just witnessed Vanessa Hale completely destroy her own wedding dress at the Cross Gala?" Below it, in the small counter that indicated engagement, 4,000 reactions in the time it had taken her to travel 31 floors and reach the car. She looked at the image for a long moment. In it, she was walking through 300 people with silver scissors in her hand and her back straight and her face wearing an expression that she now, studying it from the outside, understood was not rage. It was not grief. It was not the performance of either. It was the face of a woman who has just discovered the exact dimensions of the cage she has been living in and has made a single clear decision about what to do next. She put the phone down. "Marcus?" she said. "Yeah. I'm going to need to look at everything. Everything Dad transferred to me when he died. Every document, every share certificate, every filing Cross Industries made with my name attached to it." "Okay. And I'm going to need a lawyer. Not the firm Damien uses, not anyone he's referred, someone entirely outside his network." A pause. "I know someone, from law school. She's in corporate litigation. She's good, and she genuinely dislikes Damien Cross." "Why does she dislike him?" "Because he tried to acquire her firm 4 years ago without telling any of the partners until the papers were on the table. She walked away from the deal and has been waiting for a reason to come back around ever since." Vanessa looked out the window. The city at night, clean and cold and burning with 10,000 lights. "Call her tonight," she said. "Tonight?" He glanced at the time on the dash. "Tonight, Marcus." He reached for his phone. She turned back to the window and let the city move past her and thought, 1 week ago, she had been reviewing seating charts for this event. 2 weeks ago, she had been on the phone with a florist in Lyon about arrangements for the ceremony itself. A month ago, she had stood in Esther's atelier for the 43rd fitting and breathed carefully at Esther's instruction, the way Esther had said the dress required, built for the body under pressure. She thought about the dress now. What was left of it? The silk panels in pieces on the suite floor, the seed pearls scattered across marble, the bodice split open down its long seam. She thought about Esther's hands measuring the space between her ribs. Built for fear as much as beauty, Esther had said, or it won't sit right on the body. Vanessa had thought that was romance. She understood now that it was something else, that Esther, in the particular wisdom of someone who had spent a lifetime fitting garments to women at the inflection points of their lives, had been describing something more practical than romance. That a garment built for performance alone would fail the moment the body inside it stopped performing, that it had to account for the true shape of the person. Her phone lit up again. This time the notification was not from an unknown number. It was from Damien. The message read, "We need to talk before this gets worse." She stared at it. She thought of the exact tone in which he had said she looked better in it. The slight inflection. The casual authority of a man dismissing an inconvenience. She typed back, "Get me everything regarding the Hale stake transfer, every document you filed in my name in the past 5 years, and the full terms of the partnership agreements your legal team submitted to my father's estate. You have 48 hours. She sent it. Then she turned the phone face down again and watched the city and began, carefully and without visible emotion, to think. There were 7 things she did not yet know. She began listing them internally, the way her father had taught her to do when a situation was complex. Not catastrophizing, not spiraling, just making an inventory of the gaps, because you could not close gaps you had not yet named. 1. Whether the share transfer documents had been filed with the parameters she had been told, or with different parameters. 2. Whether the partnership agreements with her father's estate contained provisions she had not been informed of. 3. Whether Celeste Vane was new or had been concurrent for longer than tonight suggested. 4. The full scope of what Cross Industries had built in the 18 months since she had signed the last round of documents. 5. What Damien thought she was capable of, now that she had shown him something she had never shown him before. 6. What she herself was capable of, now that she had stopped asking permission. 7. What her father had known about Damien Cross that he had tried, in the last months of his illness, to tell her, and that she had not been ready to hear. That 7th one had been sitting in the back of her mind for 2 years. Tonight it moved to the front. The car pulled through the gates of the Hale family estate. The old house was dark, except for the ground floor lights that stayed on automatically after 11. The way her father had set them decades ago, because he had believed a house should always look inhabited, should never look abandoned, because you could not know who was watching. She had thought that was paranoia when she was young. She was beginning to revise that assessment. Marcus's phone lit up as they stepped out of the car. He looked at the screen, then at her. "My contact says she can meet tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. "Good." She's already seen the video. Vanessa paused on the front steps. Everyone's seen the video. She says, and I'm quoting here, she says it's the most interesting thing that's happened in this city in 3 years, and she's been waiting for exactly this call. Vanessa looked at the dark house, at the ground floor lights her father had set to never go out. "Tell her 7, she said. Tell her to bring everything she has on Cross Industries, everything that's public record." She went inside. The house smelled the way it had always smelled. Old wood and the specific dry warmth of a building that had been well maintained for a long time, and underneath it, faint and persistent, the particular smell that she had always associated with her father and that she understood now was simply the smell of books and machine oil and the quiet industry of a man who had built something real. She went to his study. She had not changed it in the 2 years since his death. She had not been able to. The desk was still positioned exactly where he had always kept it, facing the window that looked out onto the east garden, because he had said he needed to be able to look at something that was growing while he worked on things that were not. She sat down at the desk. There was a locked drawer in the lower right. Her father had given her the key 3 weeks before he died. In a moment she had understood, even then, was deliberate. He had not said anything about the contents. He had simply pressed the key into her hand with the specific pressure of someone communicating something they could not yet put into language. She had not opened it. She had been afraid of what it contained. She recognized that fear now, clearly and without self-deception. She had been afraid because some part of her had understood, in that 3 weeks before his death, that what was in that drawer had something to do with Damien, and she had not wanted to know. She had chosen, in that moment and every moment since, the version of the story that was survivable, that was manageable, that allowed her to keep walking forward without having to reconstruct everything. She opened the desk drawer and took out the small bronze key. It was lighter than she remembered. She put the key into the lower drawer lock and felt the mechanism give. Inside the drawer were 3 things: a manila envelope sealed with the Hale family crest, a small leather notebook in her father's handwriting, and a photograph. She reached for the photograph first. It was a surveillance image, grainy but unmistakable, the quality of a professional photograph taken without the subject's knowledge. It showed Damien Cross in conversation with a man she recognized only after a long moment, Roland Vane, Celeste Vane's father. A man who had been attempting, for the better part of a decade, to acquire a controlling interest in exactly the kind of mid-market holding company that the Hale family stake in Cross Industries represented. The photograph was date-stamped, 6 weeks before her father's death. Vanessa set the photograph down on the desk and placed both palms flat on the wood and looked out the window at the east garden, where nothing was visible in the dark except the shapes of things. She breathed carefully, the way Esther had taught her, accounting for fear as much as beauty, or nothing would ever sit right. Then she picked up the notebook and opened it to the first page, and what she read made the room go very quiet around her, and the city outside go very distant, and the last 5 years of her life arranged themselves into an entirely different shape than the shape she had been living in. Her phone lit up on the desk. Not Damien this time. The screen showed a name she had not seen in 2 years. A man who had worked as her father's private legal counsel and who had vanished quietly and without explanation 6 months after her father's death. The message read, "I've been watching tonight. I know what you found in that drawer. I know because I put it there, under your father's instruction, for exactly this moment. Do not tell anyone. Do not meet Marcus or your lawyer until we've spoken. There are things about Cross Industries and the Hale stake that your father discovered in his final weeks. Things that go deeper than you know, deeper than the dress, deeper than Celeste Vane. I can show you documentation that will change the shape of everything. But Vanessa, you need to understand something right now, tonight, before you take another step. The person you trust most in the room is not who you think they are." She read the message 3 times. Then she looked up, at the door of the study, at the hallway beyond it, at the dark house her father had built, and left her with a locked drawer and a key and a trust she had not yet fully understood the weight of. From somewhere in the house came the quiet sound of a door. The sound came again. Not the settling of old wood. She knew this house too well for that. Not the automatic systems cycling through their late-night routines. A door. Somewhere past the study, toward the back corridor that ran between the kitchen and the service entrance her father had kept unlocked during the years when the ground staff came and went before dawn. Vanessa did not move. She sat with both palms flat on the desk and her father's notebook open in front of her and let her ears do the work that her body wanted to do with adrenaline and speed. The sound had not repeated. One door. One quiet, deliberate close. The kind of close that someone makes when they are trying not to be heard and are almost good enough at it. Almost. She looked at the phone. The message from her father's former counsel, Lawrence Fenn, she had placed the name now, a lean, careful man who had worked in her father's shadow for 9 years and who had vanished so cleanly after the funeral that she had told herself he simply needed distance, sat on the screen. She read it once more. The person you trust most in the room is not who you think they are. She stood up. She picked up the notebook and the manila envelope and the photograph, and she put them inside her jacket, against her ribs, the way her father had taught her to carry documents when she was 12, and he had taken her to her first acquisition meeting and explained that the most important papers should always be closest to your body, because your body will protect them before your hands will. Then she went to the study door and opened it and stepped into the hallway. Marcus was standing at the end of the corridor. He was not doing anything. He was not reaching for a light switch or coming from the kitchen with a glass of water. He was simply standing at the end of the corridor with his coat still on, which was wrong because she had watched him drape that coat over the front hall rack when they came in, the automatic motion of a man who has been doing that in this house his whole life. He had the coat on now. His phone was in his hand, screen dark. He saw her, and his face arranged itself into an expression of ordinary concern. "Thought I heard something," he said. "So did I," she said. A pause. The kind that has weight. "You okay?" he said. "Come in here." She stepped back into the study. He followed. She left the door open behind him, a decision she made without knowing exactly why she made it. Marcus looked at the desk, at the open lower drawer, at the small bronze key still in the lock. His eyes moved across these things in sequence, and she watched his eyes move, which told her something. A man with nothing to hide looks at the thing itself. A man with something to hide looks at what the thing means. His eyes had moved to the open drawer and stayed there 1 second too long. "Dad's drawer," he said. "Yes." "You finally opened it." "Yes." "What was in it?" She looked at her brother. 38 years of knowing this face, the way it moved when he was lying, which was differently from the way most people moved when they were lying. Not more, but less. A very specific reduction of expression, a pulling back from the surface that she had always interpreted as him being careful and was reinterpreting now in real time with a sensation in her chest like a fist closing slowly. "Documents," she said. "Dad's notes." "About what?" "Business." "Vanessa." He said her name with the texture of patience being carefully performed. "This is not a night for being oblique. After what just happened, she said, "I'd like to understand a few things before I discuss them. That's not oblique, that's just careful. You can be careful with me." "Can I?" The two words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. She watched them hit him, watched the slight adjustment behind his eyes, the recalculation, brief and almost invisible, of a man reassessing how much she knew. "What does that mean?" he said. "When did you put your coat back on?" A beat. One full beat, which was one beat too many. "I was cold," he said. "You've never been cold in this house. Dad kept it at 68 all year and you used to complain about it. You've complained about it for 20 years. Marcus looked at her. The performance of concern was still on his face, but it had developed a quality of effort that it hadn't had before. Like a mask that fit well in low light, but was showing its edges now. "You're exhausted," he said. "Tonight was—" "Roland Vane," she said. His breath changed, almost nothing, the faintest shift in the rate of it. But she was her father's daughter, and she had been in enough rooms with enough men who were hiding enough things to know what a breath looked like when it was being controlled. "What about him?" Marcus said. "That's what I'd like to know." "Vanessa." "There's a photograph in Dad's drawer." She put her hand against her ribs, against the documents through the fabric of her jacket, a gesture she did not hide. "Damien and Roland Vane, taken 6 weeks before Dad died. Date stamped." Marcus said nothing. "Dad knew," she said. "He knew something was being arranged between them. He was sick, Marcus. He was running out of time, and he knew he was running out of time, and he put what he knew in that drawer, and he gave me the key, and then he died, and I didn't open it because I wasn't ready. And I'm asking you right now, what do you know about Roland Vane?" The silence in the study lasted a long time. Marcus walked to the window. He stood with his back to her and looked out at the east garden, the same view their father had chosen this desk to face, the same dark shapes of things that were alive but invisible in the dark. "Dad asked me not to tell you," he said. The cold that moved through her then was not temperature. It was the particular cold of a structure failing, of something you had been standing on for a long time revealing that it was not what you thought it was. "Tell me what," she said. "He found out about Vane 2 months before he died." Marcus's voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was under it was something she recognized distantly as genuinely complicated. Not simple guilt, not simple self-interest, but the sound of a man who had made a decision that cost him something real and had been living with the cost. Damien had been in contact with Vane since before you and Damien ever met, before the gala where you were introduced. Roland Vane has been trying to get his hands on the Hale family stake in Cross Industries for longer than your relationship with Damien has existed. He used me, she said. Not a question. Dad thought so. He thought Damien made contact with you strategically, that the relationship was... He stopped. Say it. Engineered. He turned from the window. His face in the study light looked older than she had noticed it looking before, which meant she had been not noticing it for a while. Dad thought Damien intended to marry you to gain access to the voting rights tied to your shares, and then, post-marriage, to use your shares as leverage to complete a back-channel deal with Vane that would restructure the Cross Industries board in Vane's favor. The marriage would make it a family transfer, clean, no hostile acquisition flags, no regulatory review. Vanessa stood very still. He engineered a 5-year relationship, she said, to move shares. To move the right shares at the right time, without triggering the provisions your grandfather put into the original Hale Trust, which required a hostile acquisition to be flagged and reviewed, but explicitly exempted intra-family transfers. He looked at her steadily. A marriage would have made it an intra-family transfer. And you knew this. I knew what Dad told me. For 2 years. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Marcus. She felt the cold settling into something harder, something structural, the specific quality of a woman who has reached the floor of a thing and is now standing on it. You watched me plan a wedding. I tried to... You said be careful. You said the shares were a life raft. Her voice was very quiet. You gave me the shape of a warning without ever giving me the thing itself. Why? He pressed one hand against the back of the desk chair. His knuckles went briefly pale. Because Dad also told me he might be wrong, he said. He was sick, Vanessa. The last 2 months, fam. His mind was sharp, but his fear was outrunning it sometimes. He said he could be wrong. He said, don't burn her life down on a theory. Get proof first. And you never got proof. You were trying to protect me from something, and what you actually did was leave me in it for 2 more years. The precision in her voice frightened her slightly, not because she was wrong, but because she was so entirely right, and the rightness of it had no heat in it. It was cold all the way down. You could have given me the key, Marcus. You could have told me about the drawer. Dad wanted you to open it when you were ready. I wasn't ready because I didn't know there was anything to be ready for. That's not wisdom. That's a lock with no instructions. He had no answer for that. She had not expected one. She picked up the key from the drawer lock and closed the drawer and put the key in her pocket. I need you to go home, she said. Vanessa, I'm not... She stopped. Started again. I'm not finished with this conversation, but I need to have it when I've had time to think, and you've had time to understand that what you withheld wasn't yours to decide. Tonight was enough of being managed by people who thought they knew better than me what I could handle. She moved toward the door and stopped beside him. Go home. Don't call Damien. Don't call anyone connected to Cross Industries. And think carefully about everything else you know that you've been keeping careful. He looked at her for a long moment with the specific expression of a man who is trying to find the sentence that repairs something and is discovering there isn't one. Not tonight. Not yet. I'm sorry, he said. I know, she said. Go home. She listened to him leave, the front door, the car pulling away, the specific diminishment of a house returning to its own silence. Then she sat back down at the desk and opened Lawrence Fenn's message again. She typed, Where are you? The response came in 11 seconds. 2 blocks east. Coffee on the corner of Hale and Meridian. I've been there since 10. I didn't know when you'd go home. She read that twice. He had been waiting. He had known she would come here, not to her apartment, not to a hotel. He had known she would go to the house. She typed, You have 20 minutes. Come to the east entrance. She put her phone down and picked up the notebook and opened it to the second page, where her father's handwriting, small, precise, the handwriting of a man who measured his words against available space, had begun to lay out something that she was now understanding was not notes. It was a case. Her father, in the last weeks of his life, with whatever reserves he had left after 30 years of building something real and 2 months of watching it be slowly undermined by a man he had once genuinely liked, had assembled a case. Dates, names, transaction numbers, the specific reference codes for wire transfers that did not appear in any Cross Industries public filing she had ever seen. The east bell rang. She left the notebook on the desk and went to the east door. Lawrence Fenn was 61 years old and looked it in the specific way that people look their age when they have spent significant portions of it carrying something heavy. He was thinner than she remembered. He had a leather document bag over one shoulder that was old enough to have her father's initials on the clasp, which meant her father had given it to him, which meant this moment had been arranged a long time before tonight. "Vanessa," he said. "Lawrence." She stepped back and let him in. He came into the study and stopped when he saw the notebook open on the desk. Something moved through his face that was not quite grief, but was made of the same materials. "He finished it," Fenn said. "The case?" "He was still building it when he died. I didn't know he finished it." He set the document bag on the desk and looked at her. "I have the rest." "Show me." He opened the bag and placed 3 folders on the desk, each tabbed with dates in her father's handwriting. She recognized the handwriting on the tabs and understood that her father had prepared these folders himself, physically, with his own hands, in the months before he died, which meant he had understood that the physical record was the one that mattered, that digital trails could be altered or lost or attributed to system errors, but paper in a locked drawer handed to a trusted man carried the specific evidentiary weight of intention. "The transfers started 4 years ago," Fenn said. He opened the first folder and laid out a sequence of documents that she recognized as internal Cross Industries financial statements, except they bore annotation marks in the margins she had never seen in any published version. Small amounts initially, routed through a subsidiary that Cross Industries acquired specifically to create a clean transfer vehicle. The subsidiary's name is Callaway Bridge Holdings. Vanessa went very still. "Callaway," she said. "The name was deliberate. Your father believed it was designed to associate with Maison Callaway in any due diligence search so that a cross-reference would generate false positives and bury the actual subsidiary in irrelevant results." Ben pointed to a number in the second column. "This is the Hale family stake's dividend yield for the year your father died. Now look at the Callaway Bridge Holdings disbursement column." They were the same number. She looked up at Fenn. "He's been extracting your dividend yield through the subsidiary," she said. "For how long?" "Since 14 months after you and he became a couple," Fenn said, "which was the exact point at which you had been together long enough that a financial entanglement would look like a natural function of the relationship and not a calculated move." She sat down. Her hands were on the desk. She looked at them, not shaking now. Something past shaking. Something that was the physical expression of a woman who has arrived at the center of a thing and found it colder and more deliberate than she had let herself imagine. "The shares," she said, "the transfer documents I signed 18 months ago. I've had them analyzed." He opened the third folder. "The documents you signed were presented to you as a standard reaffirmation of beneficial interest. Standard language, the kind you sign at a relationship milestone to update the administrative record." He placed the documents in front of her. The language in paragraph 9, section C, subsection 3, was modified from the standard template in a way that is not immediately visible. The modification creates a conditional transfer mechanism. Upon marriage, the beneficial interest converts automatically to a jointly held instrument under Cross Industries administrative law, which removes the Hale Trust protection provisions. She read paragraph 9, section C, subsection 3. She read it twice. "He would have owned them," she said, "the day after the wedding." By the time you understood what had happened, the conversion would have been filed and processed. The window to contest it under the trust terms is 72 hours from filing. By hour 73, the Hale stake would have been fully absorbed into Cross Industries' administrative structure. Ben's voice was entirely without drama. He spoke the way her father had taught her to speak about terrible things, cleanly, precisely, because the truth does not require decoration, and decoration only gives the thing somewhere to hide. Roland Vane would have received his board seats within 60 days. Vanessa closed the folder. She sat for a moment with the study around her, the desk her father had chosen for its view of growing things, the books he had kept because he believed that reading other people's arguments was the only reliable protection against the worst versions of your own, and she let the full architecture of it settle into her understanding. 5 years. Damian Cross had built 5 years of her life as a transfer vehicle. Every dinner, every trip, every morning in his penthouse kitchen where she had burned toast and made him laugh that unguarded laugh. Every document his lawyers had placed in front of her with the specific rhythm of men who needed her to sign quickly and trust the framing. Every time she had chosen to interpret as love something that was, in fact, administration. She thought about the dress, about Esther's cold fingers measuring how she breathed under pressure, about seed pearls on a marble floor. She understood now, completely, what the dress had meant. Not the insult of it, not even the cruelty. The timing. The engagement gala was the last event before the wedding. The wedding was 30 days out. Damian had been so certain of the outcome, of her compliance, her management, her continued careful smallness, that he had already begun the transfer. The dress was not carelessness. The dress was confidence. The dress was a man who had already decided the acquisition was complete and had stopped maintaining the performance. She had walked into that private suite and destroyed his confidence along with the fabric. "Lawrence," she said. "Yes." "How much of this is actionable?" He looked at her across the desk. The document bag, the folders, the notebook in her father's handwriting. "All of it," he said. "Every line." She put her hands flat on the desk. Outside, the East Garden was still dark, still growing, still doing the quiet work that living things do without instruction or applause. "Then we start tonight," she said. Ben reached into the document bag and produced one more item. A single business card, plain white, with a name she recognized from the financial press. Elena Marsh, Senior Investigator, Corporate Fraud Division, State Attorney General's Office. "Your father contacted her," Fenn said, 3 weeks before he died. "She has been waiting for the evidentiary package to be complete enough to act on." Vanessa picked up the card. She turned it over. On the back, in her father's handwriting, 3 words: "When she's ready." She looked at those 3 words for a long time, at the specific economy of them. Her father, who had measured everything against available space, who had understood that a locked drawer and a bronze key and a man waiting 2 blocks east were all forms of the same sentence. A sentence he had written for her, not to protect her from the truth, but to hold the truth until she was capable of using it. She had not been ready when he died. She had been a woman who was choosing not to know. Tonight, in a private suite on the 42nd floor of a building her almost husband owned, a pair of silver scissors in her hand and a dress coming apart under her fingers, something had shifted in the architecture of what she was capable of knowing. She thought, this is what it costs to become the version of yourself your enemy should have feared from the beginning. She picked up her phone and called a number she had never dialed. It rang twice. "Marsh, said the voice on the other end. Alert, awake. The voice of someone who does not go fully to sleep on certain kinds of nights. "My name is Vanessa Hale," she said. "I'm sitting in my father's study with Lawrence Fenn and 3 folders of documentation regarding Cross Industries, Callaway Bridge Holdings, and a conditional share transfer mechanism that was executed without my informed consent." She paused. "I'm ready." A silence on the other end. Then the sound of something being moved, papers or a chair, the acoustic evidence of a person shifting from waiting into action. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Marsh said. Vanessa put the phone down. She looked at Fenn across the desk. He had the particular expression of a man who has been carrying something for 2 years and has just been able to set it down in the right place. "There's one more thing," he said. "What?" He reached into the document bag and produced a small USB drive. He set it on the desk between them. "Your father hired an investigator in the last month of his life. The investigator placed audio in Damian's satellite office in the Meridian building. The recordings cover 11 weeks. He looked at her steadily. "One of the voices on those recordings, Vanessa, is not Damian's. It is not Roland Vane's. It is not any of his board members or legal team." He paused. "The third voice belongs to the person in your life you would have trusted with everything you just found in that drawer." She looked at the USB drive on the desk. She thought of Marcus standing at the end of the corridor with his coat on, his eyes moving to the open drawer 1 second too long. She picked up the drive. "Play it," she said. The recording lasted 19 minutes and 42 seconds. Fenn had a small portable speaker in the document bag. He set it on the desk without ceremony and pressed play, and the room filled with the specific quality of sound that surveillance audio carries. Slightly compressed, ambient noise underneath, the acoustic evidence of a space that did not know it was being listened to. Damien's voice came first. She recognized it immediately, the way you recognize something that has lived inside your daily life for years. Not just the timbre, but the specific rhythm of it, the way he weighted certain syllables when he was in control of a room. Then the second voice, Roland Vane, older, rougher at the edges. The voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the politeness was purely ornamental. Then the third. Vanessa sat with her hands flat on the desk and listened to her brother's voice come out of the speaker, and the study went very quiet around her, and the east garden beyond the window went very far away, and the 38 years of knowing Marcus Hale's face and trusting Marcus Hale's counsel and measuring her own caution against his warnings arranged themselves into a new shape so fast it was almost physical, like a bone being reset. Marcus was speaking in the careful, modulated tone he used when he was managing something. Not the tone she heard at family dinners or in cars at night driving back from galas. The professional tone, the tone of a man who was a participant in a negotiation, not a witness to one. The timing on the transfer mechanism has to be airtight, Marcus said on the recording. If she contests within 72 hours, you lose the provision entirely. The ceremony has to file before she understands what she's signed. A pause. Vane's voice. She'll understand eventually. Eventually is after, Marcus said. After is all we need. Damien. She won't contest. She's been managed for 5 years. She'll be angry about the specifics when she finds them. But anger without documentation is just noise. By the time she has documentation, the transfer is complete. Marcus. Just make sure the Callaway filings are clean before the wedding. I don't want a paper trail that leads back to the dividend extraction. That one she'd actually understand fast. Fenn reached across and stopped the recording. The silence it left was enormous. Vanessa did not move for a long time. She sat with the silence and let it do what it needed to do, which was settle. The way sediment settles in water after a disturbance, down through the layers until it reached the floor and became something you could see clearly. Managed, Marcus had said. She's been managed for 5 years. She thought of every conversation, every warning that was shaped like concern but never quite became information. Every time he had stood beside her at an event and said, "You look like you're waiting for a verdict," and she had taken it for love, and it had been, she understood now, monitoring. The particular attention of a man who needed to know how close she was to the edge of what she could tolerate, so that he could calibrate the distance between her and the truth. She thought of tonight, of him standing at the end of the corridor with his coat on, his eyes on the open drawer. He had come back into the house after she sent him away. He had used the service entrance, the one their father had left unlocked, and he had come back in to see what she had found. "How long?" she said. Fenn looked at her steadily. "The earliest recording with Marcus present is 14 months ago. Before the documents I signed. 3 weeks before." She pressed her fingers against the desk surface. The wood was solid and cool and entirely indifferent to the fact that the architecture of everything she had trusted was currently undergoing a structural failure in her chest. "He helped them design the mechanism," she said. He had specific knowledge of the Hale trust provisions that Damien's legal team would not have had access to otherwise. The conditional transfer clause was only possible because someone with internal knowledge of the original trust language told them exactly where the exemption was and exactly how to draft around it. Fenn folded his hands on the desk. Marcus was the only person outside the trust attorneys who had that language. Your father gave it to him in confidence. As the eldest. She thought of her father pressing the bronze key into her hand 3 weeks before he died. The specific pressure of it. She thought of the notebook, the folders, the USB drive. She thought of what it meant that her father had assembled all of it and given it to Fenn to hold, and had told Fenn to wait until she opened the drawer herself, and had told Marcus, apparently, that the drawer existed but had not given Marcus the key. Her father had known. He had known about Marcus and had not told her directly, because she would not have believed it directly, and he had not had time to make her believe it through accumulation of evidence, So he had done the only thing available to a man running out of time with a daughter who was not ready. He had built the case and hidden the key and trusted that the night would come when she would open the drawer herself and the truth would be something she had arrived at rather than something she had been handed. He had been right. She would not have believed it handed. She believed it now. "Elena Marsh," she said, "when she gets here. She needs to hear this recording." "Yes, all of it. And I need to know, does the recording establish criminal exposure?" For Damien, clearly. Fraud, conspiracy to commit securities manipulation, breach of fiduciary duty. He paused. For Marcus, the recording establishes knowing participation in the conspiracy and specifically names his role in providing privileged trust information. That is, at minimum, breach of fiduciary duty to a beneficiary, potentially criminal conspiracy depending on how aggressively Marsh wants to move. How aggressively does she want to move? She has been building a case against Cross Industries for 2 years without sufficient documentation to act. Your father's folders give her the documentation. The recording gives her the mechanism and the participants. He looked at her evenly. She will move as aggressively as the evidence permits. Vanessa stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the east garden and thought, for one clear moment, of her brother at age 12 teaching her to ride a bicycle in this same garden, his hand on the back of the seat, his voice steady. "I've got you. I've got you. I won't let go." And the specific sensation of the moment when she had finally understood he had already let go, that she was riding alone, and she had not fallen. She had not fallen because she was already doing it herself. She had just needed to believe, for the critical seconds, that she wasn't alone. She understood what that memory was telling her now. She turned away from the window. "There's one more thing I need to know," she said to Fenn. "The gala tonight. Damien let me walk into that private suite. He knew where I was in the room. He had been tracking me for years through Marcus. He knew I was moving toward the east corridor." Fenn said nothing, waiting. "He let me find them," she said. "The dress. Celeste wearing it. He let me find it, and he let me destroy it, because a public breakdown is cleaner than a quiet departure. A woman who cuts up a wedding dress in front of 300 people is a woman everyone will describe as unstable. A woman everyone will describe as unstable is a woman no one will believe when she starts talking about document fraud and dividend extraction and conditional transfer mechanisms." She looked at Fenn. He engineered the ending as carefully as he engineered the beginning. The silence in the study confirmed it. "He wanted the spectacle," she said. "Yes," Fenn said, "and Marcus told him where I was in the room." "We believe so." She thought about the scissors in her hand, the clean sound of silk shearing, the seed pearls on the floor. She had believed in that moment that she was acting, that the scissors were hers, the decision was hers, the fury was hers. The fury was hers. She held on to that. Whatever else had been arranged and positioned and manipulated into place, the fury had been real and it had been hers. And the decision to pick up those scissors had been made by a woman who had finally run out of the energy required to keep choosing ignorance. That part had not been engineered. That part was the thing that had gone wrong in Damien's plan. He had calculated for a woman who would fall apart publicly and then go quiet. He had not calculated for a woman who would go home to her father's study and open a locked drawer. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She picked it up. "Damien, I need you to understand what happens if this goes further. The share documents are filed. The mechanism is in place. You have options here that don't require destruction. Call me." She read the message twice, the specific language of it. Options here that don't require destruction. The language of a man who was recalibrating, who had noted that the variable he had not accounted for was in motion, who was now attempting to bring her back inside the frame before the situation exceeded his control. She put the phone face down and did not respond. At 40 past midnight, Elena Marsh arrived. She was shorter than Vanessa had imagined, compact and precise in the way that certain people are physically compact in a manner that communicates nothing about the actual scope of what they contain. She had dark eyes that moved across the study in the first 3 seconds with the specific economy of someone performing a rapid assessment and not bothering to hide that she was doing it. "Ms. Hale," she said. "Marsh," Vanessa said. "Sit down." Marsh sat. She opened her own bag and produced a recording device, a legal pad, and 3 pens, which she lined up with a tidiness that suggested either habit or nerves or the specific precision of someone who was trying to ensure they missed nothing. Fen placed the folders on the desk between them. Marsh looked at the folders, then at Fen, then at Vanessa. "Your father was thorough," she said. "He was dying," Vanessa said. "Thoroughness was all he had left to give me." Something shifted in Marsh's expression. Not softness, but recognition. The look of someone who has heard a sentence that is exactly true. "Walk me through the share mechanism first," Marsh said. They worked for 2 hours. The study light was the kind of warm that makes the outside dark look deeper. Vanessa talked, and Fen produced documents, and Marsh made notes in a handwriting that was small and fast and unambiguous, the handwriting of someone accustomed to getting things down accurately and quickly before they disappeared. When they reached the recording, Marsh stopped writing. She listened to the full 19 minutes and 42 seconds without moving. When it ended, she sat for a moment with her pen motionless on the legal pad. "The third voice," she said. "Confirm." "Marcus Hale," Vanessa said. "My brother." Marsh looked at her. A direct, clear look that was evaluating something she needed to evaluate. "You're certain?" "I've known that voice for 38 years. A pause. "This changes the scope of the filing." "I know. We can proceed against Cross Industries and limit the Marcus Hale exposure to civil, if that's your preference. Or we file the full criminal conspiracy." "File everything," Vanessa said. Marsh looked at her for one more moment. Then she wrote something on the legal pad and underlined it. "I'll need 48 hours to prepare the filing," she said. "In that time, you cannot contact your brother, Damian Cross, Roland Vane, or anyone in their legal network. You cannot post, respond to media inquiries, or do anything that signals to Cross Industries that this is coming." "Understood." "The social media situation from tonight is actually useful cover. They're expecting you to be in crisis. Let them." Marsh closed her legal pad. "Can you do that? Stay quiet for 48 hours while they believe they've contained you?" Vanessa thought of Damian's message. Options here that don't require destruction. The specific confidence of a man who had spent 5 years watching her choose to believe the better version of every story. "Yes," she said. Marsh stood. She picked up the folders carefully with both hands. "I'll be in contact through Fen. Do not call this number directly until I instruct you to." She left. Fen began gathering the remaining documents. He moved with the specific deliberateness of a man who has just watched something become irreversible and is treating the remaining objects in the room accordingly. "Lawrence," Vanessa said. He looked up. "Did my father know it would cost me Marcus?" Fen was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not an absence of answer, but a preparation for one that is true rather than comfortable. "He knew it might," Fen said. "He told me at the end, he said she will lose the shape of her family that she thought she had. He said that's the hardest part, not Damian, not the company, the shape of it." He looked at her steadily. "He said you were strong enough, that he had watched you your whole life and you were strong enough for the shape of it to change without you coming apart." She held that. Outside, the east garden was still dark. The growing things were still growing, quietly and without witness, doing the work that living things do at 3 a.m. when no one is watching and there is no performance required, and the only thing that matters is continuing. She thought of what she had walked into tonight believing she was, what she was walking out of it as, not stronger in the way people meant when they said that word carelessly, not harder, not angrier, not more defended. Something more specific than that. The particular kind of strong that is not armor, but is instead the knowledge, finally metabolized into the body, that you can withstand the exact temperature of the truth about your own life without going under. Her father had known she could. He had built her the evidence and hidden it behind a lock and given her the key and waited. She had just needed a pair of scissors and a wedding dress and a man who said she looked better in it. She picked up her phone, not to call anyone, just to check the time. 3:14 in the morning. 48 hours from now, Elena Marsh would file. 48 hours from now, the case that her father had built in the last weeks of his life with whatever was left of his strength would move from a locked drawer into the formal machinery of consequence, and Damian Cross would understand for the first time that the woman he had spent 5 years managing had spent the last 6 hours becoming something he had never accounted for. She thought, 48 hours of quiet, 48 hours of letting them believe they had contained her. She could do 48 hours. Her phone lit up. Not Damian, not Marcus. A number she did not recognize. A message with no text, only an image. She opened it. It was a photograph of the Hale family study, taken through the east window. In the photograph, she could see herself clearly, sitting at her father's desk, the folders open in front of her, Fen across from her with the document bag, Marsh at the corner with her legal pad. The photograph had been taken less than 2 hours ago. Below the image, 3 words appeared. "We see you." Vanessa stared at the screen. The room was very quiet. The 48 hours she had just committed to contracted, in that moment, into a different shape entirely. No longer a strategic interval, but a countdown. Not of her choosing, inside which someone who was not Damian and not Marcus had been standing in the east garden in the dark, watching through the window of her father's study while she laid out everything she had. She looked at the east window, at the dark beyond it. She thought, the plan she had just made assumed that Damian did not know what she had found, that he believed he had contained her. She thought, someone in this house tonight had sent him a photograph before she had a chance to move. She thought, 48 hours was no longer a luxury she had. She picked up Fen's phone from the desk. Not hers, because hers was compromised, because someone had been watching and someone had her number, and called Marsh. 1 ring, 2. Marsh. It's Hale. Someone photographed us in the study tonight. They know about the meeting. They know about the folders. A silence on the other end that was very brief and very complete. How long ago? The timestamp on the image is 11:47. That was during our first hour. Yes. Another silence. Then, we don't have 48 hours. No, Vanessa said. I can file an emergency preliminary injunction tonight to freeze the share transfer mechanism pending fraud review. It buys us legal standing before they can move to accelerate the filing. But Vanessa, Marsh's voice changed register, not softer but lower, the specific tone of a person communicating something that matters about what comes next. If I file tonight, there is no taking it back. Cross Industries will know by morning. Marcus will know. Every piece of this becomes public record, and there is no version of the next month of your life that looks like anything you've lived before. Vanessa looked at the east window, at her own reflection in the dark glass. A woman at her father's desk with a dead man's notebook and a photograph of herself being watched. She thought, this is the moment her father had built everything toward. Not the filing, not the legal machinery. This specific second, the one where the version of herself that had spent 5 years being careful and managed and small enough to be loved by a man who needed her not to be too much, had run all the way to the edge of what was survivable, and the only direction left was through. She had been the wrong shape for 5 years, shaped around someone else's requirements, sized down to fit a relationship that was not a relationship, but a transaction. And she had not known because she had not let herself know, and now she knew, and the only question left was whether she had the capacity to become, in the next 12 hours, the size she had always actually been. She thought she had destroyed a dress tonight. She had opened a drawer. She had listened to her brother's voice in a recording she was not supposed to find. She was still standing. File, she said. Marsh filed at 4:17 in the morning. Vanessa knew the exact time because she was sitting at her father's desk when Fen's phone lit up with the confirmation. A single line of text from Marsh's paralegal, terse and precise the way legal language is when it is doing something that cannot be undone. Emergency preliminary injunction filed, docket number attached, freeze effective immediately pending fraud review hearing. Cross Industries Legal will be served by 6 a.m., 2 hours. She had 2 hours before Damian's legal team opened their phones and found the filing and understood what had happened in the East Garden study of the Hale family house while they were busy believing she was in crisis. Ben looked at her across the desk. You should sleep. No. Vanessa. Someone was in that garden tonight. Someone photographed us through the window and sent it to Damian within the hour. That means there is a person with access to this property who is not Marcus and not anyone I've identified yet. She looked at him steadily. I'm not sleeping in this house tonight. He accepted that without argument, which told her he had already reached the same conclusion. She spent the next hour making calls she should not have been able to make at 4 in the morning, except that the people she called were the kind of people who answered at 4 in the morning because they had built their careers on being available exactly when everyone else was not. A forensic accountant she had worked with on her father's estate settlement, a woman named Priya Das, who had the specific genius of being able to read financial architecture the way other people read faces. A former Cross Industries mid-level analyst named Carter Reese, who had left the company 18 months ago under circumstances that had been described publicly as a restructuring and that Vanessa now suspected had a different shape entirely. Carter answered on the second ring. "Ms. Hale," he said, not surprised. The voice of a man who had been waiting for a call that might be this one. "You left Cross Industries 18 months ago," she said. "Around the same time I signed the share reaffirmation documents." A pause. "Yes." "Did you leave or were you removed?" Another pause, longer. "I found something in the Callaway Bridge Holdings filings that didn't reconcile with the Cross Industries main ledger. I brought it to my direct supervisor. 3 days later, I was restructured." "Did you keep copies?" The silence on the other end had a particular quality. The quality of a man who had been keeping something for a long time without knowing when or whether there would ever be a right moment to put it down. "Yes," he said. "I need them. I need them in the next 90 minutes. "Where?" She gave him an address 2 blocks from the Ardent Tower. A coffee shop that opened at 5, that she had used before for early meetings when she did not want to be seen going into any building associated with Cross Industries. Neutral ground. Public enough that nothing could happen quietly. She left the house at 5. Fen came with her. The city at that hour had the quality of something not yet fully assembled. The streets clean and cold, the light just beginning to gray at the eastern edges, the particular silence of a place that was about to become loud again and had not started yet. Carter Reese was already at a corner table when they arrived. He was in his early 30s, thinner than she had expected from the company photo she vaguely remembered, with the specific physical compression of someone who had been carrying a level of stress that takes weight off a person rather than putting it on. He had a laptop bag on the seat beside him and a coffee in front of him that he had not touched. He slid a folder across the table before she sat down. 6 months of Callaway Bridge ledger reconciliation, he said. I had to reconstruct it from the fragments I was able to take out before they locked my access. But the core of it is there. The transfers match the pattern. There's a secondary layer I found 3 weeks before I was removed, a sub-account within the Callaway structure that routes a portion of the extracted funds to a holding entity in the Cayman structure. Whose holding entity? He looked at her. That's the part I couldn't fully reconstruct. The beneficial ownership was masked behind 2 layers of nominee structure. But I traced the original incorporation documents to a law firm that I know does work for one person exclusively in this city. He put a single page on top of the folder. The law firm's name was there. And below it, the name of the firm's primary client for the past decade, which was a matter of public record. Roland Vane. She had known. She had known since the photograph in her father's drawer. But knowing and seeing it documented in 2 separate investigative trails, constructed entirely independently of each other, were different things. One was a theory that could be challenged. 2 was the beginning of a structure that could hold weight in a courtroom. I'm going to need you to provide this to the State Attorney General's office, she said. Carter looked at her. That's exposure for me. Yes. I signed an NDA when I left Cross Industries. An NDA cannot protect a company from fraud investigation. Any NDA provision that purports to prevent cooperation with a criminal investigation is void as against public policy. She said it flatly, the way her father had always said legal facts. Not to intimidate, but because precision was kindness, because people made better decisions when they knew the actual shape of things. You are not exposed by cooperating. You may be exposed by not cooperating if Cross Industries goes down and your prior knowledge becomes a matter of discovery. He was quiet. His coffee sat untouched. Outside, the city was beginning its early morning assembly. The first delivery trucks, a runner on the far sidewalk, the sound of a security gate rolling up somewhere down the block. Okay, he said. She took the folder. At 6:14, she was in a car moving across the city toward the Meridian district when her phone rang. Not Fenn's phone. Hers. She looked at the screen. Marcus. She let it ring. 4 times, 5. It stopped. 30 seconds later, it rang again. She picked it up. Vanessa. His voice was different from last night. The performance was completely gone. What was under it was raw in a way she had not heard from him since their father's funeral. I know about the filing. Good, she said. I need to talk to you before... You had 2 years, Marcus. You had the night Dad gave me that key and didn't give you one. You had every conversation since then where I told you I was fine and you let me believe you were concerned and were actually monitoring. You had tonight in the corridor when you came back into the house with your coat on. Her voice was entirely steady. You had every single one of those moments and you chose the same thing every time. I don't have anything to talk about right now. Vanessa, did Damien send you the photograph? Silence. Did you know someone was in the garden? The silence had a texture. The specific texture of a man whose answer is not yes and not no, but something more complicated that lives in the territory between those two positions, which was in some ways worse than a clean yes. I didn't know they were going to photograph you, he said. I told Damien you'd gone to the house. I didn't know he had someone watching. You told him where I was. Vanessa, I thought I was buying time. I thought if he knew you were at the house and not talking to anyone yet, he'd hold off on doing anything aggressive and I'd have time to what? He didn't answer. To manage it, she said, to find the version of this where you're still standing at the end. That's what you were doing. That is what you have always been doing. She looked out the car window at the city assembling itself in the early light. Marcia's going to contact you today. When she does, you're going to need to make a decision about how you want to proceed. That decision is yours. I can't make it for you, and I'm not going to try. A pause. That's the difference between us. She ended the call. Ben looked at her from the passenger seat. She said nothing. She looked at the city. At 6:45, Damien's legal team filed an emergency motion to stay the injunction pending a hearing, which Marsh had anticipated, and for which he had prepared a 40-page opposition that had apparently been drafted in the 6 weeks prior to tonight, during the period when Marsh had been waiting for the evidentiary package and had used the waiting time to prepare for the exact legal move that Cross Industries would make at the moment of filing. Her phone, Fenn's phone, and and the car radio all seemed to arrive at the same moment at the news that Cross Industries had retained outside litigation counsel and had issued a brief statement describing the injunction as a malicious and legally meritless action by a disgruntled former partner. Former partner. She noted the language. Former. As if the relationship had already been officially terminated by them, in their framing, which meant they were positioning her publicly as someone who had been ejected rather than someone who had left, which was the specific move of a legal team trying to get ahead of a narrative before the other side could establish one. They did not know about Carter Reese. They did not know about the Cayman sub-account. They did not know that Priya Das had been awake since 4:30 with the Callaway Bridge ledger reconciliation and had called Vanessa at 6:50 with a number, a specific dollar figure representing the total extracted from the Hale dividend yield across the period of Damien's manipulation that was large enough to convert the fraud charge from a civil matter to a federal one. The Cross Industries annual corporate anniversary event was in 11 hours. She had known about the event for 6 months. It was the largest single gathering of Cross Industries investors, board members, institutional partners, and media contacts that Damien hosted each year. 400 people. The ballroom of the Ardent Tower, same building as last night's gala, 2 floors below. Damien would be presenting the annual performance report, projecting the acquisition pipeline, celebrating the continued expansion of an empire that was, as of 4:17 this morning, legally frozen pending fraud review. He would not cancel it. She knew that without needing to reason it through. Canceling the event would be the first confirmation that something was wrong. Damien Cross did not confirm that things were wrong. He managed the optics until the last possible second and then managed the aftermath of the optics. And that was the entire strategic architecture of how he had operated for the past 20 years. He would stand at the podium of his own corporate anniversary event with a preliminary injunction on the Hale share transfer and a fraud investigation active and 400 investors in the room. And he would project absolute control because that was the only move available to him. Unless something made the room itself the place where control stopped being available. She sat with that thought in the car and let it develop. Marsh called at 7:30. The stay motion was denied. Judge reviewed our opposition and agreed the injunction stands pending full hearing. We're scheduled for Friday. A pause. Damien's team is going to escalate. They'll move to discredit the Fenn documentation, challenge the chain of custody on the recording, and attempt to establish that you acted in bad faith by filing while under emotional distress from last night's public incident. The scissors, Vanessa said. They will absolutely use the scissors. Expect a narrative built around impulsivity, emotional instability, and a vendetta against a former partner. It's a standard playbook. What counters it? Evidence. Clean, documented, third-party verified evidence presented in a context where the audience is too significant for the counter-narrative to hold. Marcia's voice had a specific quality now, careful, as if she was approaching a thought she had not yet said aloud. The corporate anniversary event tonight. I'm going, Vanessa said. A silence. I was going to say I cannot officially recommend that. I know. Vanessa, if you walk into that event tonight, Damien's team will characterize it as harassment, as a deliberate attempt to interfere with his business relationships. And it will complicate the fraud case because his lawyers will argue you are acting in retaliation rather than in good faith. Or, she said, 400 investors see the evidence directly, not filtered through a press release, not managed through Damien's communication team, directly in the room, while Damien is standing at the podium presenting numbers that the injunction has already established may constitute fraud. Another silence. I cannot be present at that event, Marsh said. I know. And there is no version of what you're describing that doesn't carry significant personal risk. I know. Then I'll note for the record, Marsh said, and her voice had shifted into something that was not quite warm but was something adjacent to it. The tone of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this kind of case her entire career and is now watching it move into territory that textbooks don't cover, that my client is acting independently and against my counsel. Noted, Vanessa said. She spent the next 4 hours preparing with the specific intensity of someone who has reached the point where fear becomes fuel, where the body stops distinguishing between terror and capability and simply begins moving with the velocity of a person who has nothing left to protect except the truth. Priados delivered a compressed financial summary. 6 pages, clear language, number-by-number evidence of the Callaway Bridge extraction, the Cayman sub-account, and the fraudulent share transfer mechanism that could be read and understood by someone with basic financial literacy in under 10 minutes. Vanessa reviewed it 3 times. Priya walked her through the 2 numbers that mattered most, the total extracted from the Hale dividend yield and the projected value of the Hale stake post-marriage transfer, which was the number that made the motive clear in a way that no one in that room tonight would be able to argue with. Carter Reese provided a signed declaration to Fenn that would be filed with Marsh's office before noon. At 10, Vanessa went back to the Hale house. Not to sleep, to change. She stood in her father's bedroom. She could not go back to the apartment she and Damien had shared, and she would not, and looked at herself in the mirror above his dresser. She had not slept. Her eyes showed it. She looked like someone who had walked through a fire and come out the other side not unscathed but standing. She thought, you cannot walk into that room tonight looking like someone who was hurt last night. Not because the hurt wasn't real, but because the room will process it as weakness and Damien will use the processing. She thought, you can't perform strength either. Perform strength breaks under pressure, and he knows all the ways to apply pressure because he has been applying it for 5 years. She thought, the only thing that is actually going to work in that room is the truth. Not performed, not managed, just the exact, documented, undeniable truth delivered by a woman who is no longer afraid of what it costs to say it out loud. She put on a dark suit, not the sapphire gown, not the dress she had worn last night into a room she had not understood. Something clean and without ornament and entirely her own. At 6 in the evening, she was standing in a car park 2 streets from the Ardent Tower with Fen and Priya Das and a USB drive containing the full Callaway Bridge documentation and a copy of the recording, and she was putting the financial summary into a small leather portfolio, her father's, the one with the Hale family crest on the clasp, the same one Fen had used last night, and she was breathing the way Esther had taught her, slowly, accounting for fear. "You understand," Fen said, "that once you walk through that door, the shape of this changes entirely. It is no longer a legal proceeding. It becomes a public event. Everything that happens in that room will be witnessed by 400 people and recorded and distributed within hours." "Good," she said. "Damien will have security. When they recognize you—" "They'll recognize me," she said. "I've been to this event 4 times. I know the security team by name. They know me as Damien Cross's partner of 5 years. Tonight they're going to discover that the legal definition of that relationship has been altered by a preliminary injunction, which means I am no longer governed by any guest list Damien controls." She picked up the portfolio. "And I'm going to walk through the front door." The Ardent Tower lobby at 7 in the evening was full of the specific movement of people arriving for a significant event. Suited men and women with the purposeful walk of people who had places to be and wanted the lobby to know it. Security at the elevator bank. Guest list management at a registration table near the entrance. She walked in. The security team lead saw her before she reached the table. His name was Harlan. He had worked Damien's events for 3 years. He was a large, careful man who did his job thoroughly and without drama. He stepped forward. "Ms. Hale," he said. "Harlan," she said. His face had the specific quality of a person who has received instructions they find professionally uncomfortable. "I have to ask you to check whether I'm on the list," she said. "I understand. I'm not on the list tonight. I also have in this portfolio documentation filed with the State Attorney General's office earlier today establishing an active fraud investigation into Cross Industries and a preliminary injunction freezing the Hale family share transfer." She opened the portfolio and removed the top sheet. Marcia's injunction confirmation, docket number visible, bearing the court seal, and held it out to him. "I'm not here as a guest. I'm here as a material party to an active legal proceeding that directly involves the content of tonight's presentation. Removing me from the building would constitute obstruction." Harlan looked at the document. He looked at her. He was a man who did his job thoroughly, which meant he was also a man who understood when a situation had exceeded the scope of his instructions. He stepped aside. The elevator rose. She stood in it alone. Fen and Priya had positioned themselves in the lobby being the right place for them, the room upstairs being the one she had to enter herself. And she looked at the floor indicator and thought of the last time she had been in this elevator, descending, her hands shaking in the aftermath of silver scissors and silk on the floor. The doors opened on the 40th floor. The ballroom was already full. 400 people, the investors and board members and institutional partners of Cross Industries' empire, at tables and at the bar, and in the specific social configuration of people who are present at a significant event and are performing their significance by being visibly relaxed about it. At the front of the room, on a low stage with the Cross Industries logo behind it, and a presentation screen dark and waiting, Damien Cross was speaking to 2 men she recognized as major institutional investors. His back was to the room. He had not yet seen her. She walked in. The first person to notice was a woman near the entrance whose name Vanessa knew, a board member's wife who had been at every one of these events for 4 years and who had seen her destroy a dress 20 hours ago. The woman's expression moved through recognition to surprise to something that was rapidly becoming alarm. And she touched her husband's arm, and he turned, and then the specific chain reaction of notice spread outward through the room the way it had spread through the gala the night before. That same shift in collective attention that happens when something enters a space that changes its pressure. Damien turned. He saw her. Across the full width of the ballroom, through 400 people and the low ambient noise of a gathering that was going quiet by degrees, they looked at each other. She had known this face for 5 years. She knew the precise way it moved when Damien was recalculating, the stillness before the adjustment, the fraction of a second where the machinery behind the eyes was running faster than the face could keep up with. She watched him decide. He made the wrong decision. She could see it happen. The choice to maintain control by maintaining the performance, to walk toward her with the specific ease of a man who is not threatened, to manage this the way he had managed everything, from the front of the room, with the room watching, because the room watching had always been his advantage. He crossed toward her. The crowd shifted to create a path, the instinctive parting of people who sense that what is about to happen between these two people should have space. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough for conversation, far enough for the room to see both their faces. "Vanessa," he said. His voice was entirely measured. "This isn't the place." "I disagree," she said. "You've made your point. Last night was the beginning," she said. "Tonight is the documentation." She reached into the portfolio and removed the financial summary. 6 pages. Priya Das's clear numbers. The Callaway Bridge extraction. The Cayman sub-account. The fraudulent share transfer mechanism and the projected value of what it was designed to move. She held it out to the nearest investor, a man she knew by name, a man who had $40 million in Cross Industries' third acquisition fund, a man who had shaken her hand at this event 4 times and asked her how the wedding planning was going. "Read page 3, she said. "The number in the second column is what Cross Industries has been extracting from the Hale family dividend yield through a shell subsidiary. The number in the fourth column is the value of the share stake they intended to absorb through a marriage transfer designed to circumvent the Hale Trust's hostile acquisition provisions." She looked at the man steadily. "Page 5 has the Cayman sub-account. Page 6 has the docket number for the active fraud investigation filed with the State Attorney General's office this morning." The man took the paper. Damien's hand came out and landed on her arm. She looked at his hand on her arm. The same hand she had looked at in the private suite, on Celeste Vane's arm. She looked at it with the specific clarity of a woman who knows exactly what a touch means when it is not about connection, but about control. "Get your hand off me," she said. He did not move his hand. "Damien." Her voice was entirely quiet. The specific quiet she had found in the study the night before, the one that came from the floor of a thing rather than the surface of it. "Take your hand off my arm, or I will describe in full detail to every person in this room the exact conversation captured on the recording that was filed with the Attorney General's office at 4:17 this morning, including the parts that involved the specific trust provisions you obtained through Marcus Hale in exchange for what consideration, exactly, I haven't yet established but intend to." Something moved through his face. Not the recalculation she was used to, something raw. The expression of a man who has just understood that the variable he failed to account for was not her knowledge but her willingness to use it in exactly the place where it would do the most damage. He took his hand off her arm. She turned to the room. 400 faces. The investors and board members and institutional partners of the empire that Damien Cross had built, or had appeared to build, over 20 years. Some of them afraid. Some of them calculating. Some of them with the financial summary already in their hands, passed from the first man to 2 others to 5, moving through the room with the velocity of something that people needed to touch to believe. She opened her mouth, and the doors of the ballroom opened. Not security, not event staff. Elena Marsh walked through the doors with 2 men she recognized as federal investigators. Not state, federal, which meant the case had escalated in the hours since she and Marsh had last spoken, had crossed a threshold that Vanessa had not been told about, had become something larger than a preliminary injunction. And behind them, 4 additional men in the specific configuration of people who are present to execute a document rather than to have a conversation. Damien saw them. She watched his face in the moment that he understood. She had thought, in the abstract, that she wanted to see him broken. She had thought the satisfaction of this moment would be proportional to the 5 years of its construction. But what she felt, watching the specific expression of a man who has built his entire identity on the belief that he controls every room he enters, watching that belief dissolve in real time, was not satisfaction. It was something colder and cleaner than satisfaction. The particular feeling of a structure finally bearing the weight it was designed for. Marsh crossed the room. She did not look at Vanessa. She looked at Damien. "Mr. Cross," she said, "I have a federal warrant for the seizure of Cross Industries' financial records pursuant to an investigation into securities fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud. She held out the warrant. I'm also required to inform you that you are the subject of this investigation and that you have the right to legal counsel. The room was completely silent. Damien looked at the warrant. He looked at Marsh. He looked at the 4 men positioned at the exits of his ballroom, in his building, at his event. Then he looked at Vanessa. It was a long look. The specific look of a man who is performing a final accounting and has arrived at a number he did not expect. In it, she could see the 5 years compressing. Not with sentiment, not with regret, but with the particular expression of a chess player who has just identified the move that ended the game 3 moves ago. He had underestimated her, not her intelligence. He had known she was intelligent, had used her intelligence, had valued it the way you value a tool that does the work you need without asking questions about why. He had underestimated the thing underneath the intelligence. The thing that Esther had measured when she had pressed cold fingers against Vanessa's ribs and said a dress must account for fear or it won't sit right on the body. He had never measured what was underneath. She held his gaze and did not look away, and felt, for the first time in 5 years, the exact dimensions of herself. Marsh turned to her, briefly. A look that carried something that was not quite professional but was not quite personal either. The look of one woman to another who has just done something that will cost something real and has done it anyway. We'll need a statement, Marsh said. I know, Vanessa said. The federal investigators moved toward Damien. One of his board members was already on a phone at the far edge of the room. The financial summary was in 6 different hands that she could count. 2 people near the bar were filming on their phones with the specific directness of people who have understood that what they are witnessing is historical. Damien Cross, surrounded in his own ballroom, said nothing. He looked at Vanessa one more time, and then he looked away. That was the moment. Not the filing, not the warrant, not the federal investigators in the doorway of his empire. The moment was him looking away. The first time in 5 years that he had looked away from her first. She breathed in slowly, counted, let it out. Outside, 40 stories above the city, the night was doing what it did. Burning with 10,000 lights, indifferent and honest. The raw evidence of lives in motion that did not require an audience to continue. She thought, it is not over. The hearing is Friday. The federal investigation will take months. Marcus will have to make his decision and live with it. The Hale stake will need to be restored through a process that will be contested at every stage by legal teams who are paid to contest things. It is not over. But the shape of it has changed. She picked up her portfolio. She turned toward the door, and her phone lit up with a number she did not recognize and a message that contained 3 words and a file attachment that froze her mid-step. Because the 3 words were, "There's more." And the file attachment was a document bearing the Cross Industries letterhead and dated 4 years ago, and the subject line read, Hale, Thomas, Medical Records Request. And the name of the physician copied on the correspondence was the same physician who had told her father, 6 months before his death, that his illness was not progressing as quickly as initial projections suggested, and then, 6 weeks later, had revised that assessment entirely. She stood in the doorway of the ballroom for 11 seconds. She counted them. Not deliberately. The counting happened in that involuntary way the mind does arithmetic when it needs something precise to hold on to while everything else is moving too fast. Behind her, the room was still active with the specific noise of a situation in process. Marsh's voice, the low rapid exchange of attorneys being summoned by phone, the shuffling displacement of 400 people who had come for a corporate celebration and were now witnesses to something they would be describing for years. In front of her was the corridor, the elevator bank, the city beyond the glass. In her hand was her phone with a document on it that she was not yet ready to open fully. She had read the subject line. She had seen the physician's name. She had understood, in the instinctive way you understand things that your body recognizes before your mind has finished processing them, what the document was likely to contain. She got into the elevator. She pressed the lobby button and stood in the rising quiet of the descending car and opened the document. It was a letter. Cross Industries letterhead, 4 years old, addressed to a physician named Dr. Elliot Crane. The letter was from Damien's personal legal counsel, Not the firm, his personal attorney, the one who handled the things that did not go through official channels. And it contained a request, specific, detailed, and written in the particular careful language of someone who needed the request to be understood without being stated directly. It asked Dr. Crane to review Thomas Hale's medical file and provide a second opinion regarding the pace of disease progression, with particular attention to factors that might, and this was the phrase, might accelerate the timeline. Below the letter was a second document, a payment record, a transfer from a Cayman-registered account, the same Cayman structure from the Callaway Bridge sub-account, to a private account in Dr. Crane's name. The payment was dated 3 weeks before her father's physician had revised his prognosis from stable deterioration to rapid decline. 6 weeks after that revision, her father had died. The elevator reached the lobby. She stood in it for a moment after the doors opened, and a man waiting to board looked at her with the cautious expression of someone unsure whether to step around her or wait. And she stepped out, and he stepped in, and the doors closed behind her, and she stood in the marble lobby of the Ardent Tower and breathed. In, slowly, the way Esther had said, out. The full shape of it was visible now. Not the fraud, not the share transfer. The full shape. Damien Cross had not simply engineered a relationship to steal her father's assets. He had looked at the timeline, at the rate of her father's deterioration, at the trust provisions that would complicate a transfer while Thomas Hale was alive and cognitively present and capable of contesting. And he had decided the timeline needed adjustment. Her father had not run out of time naturally. He had been given less. She stood in the lobby and let that settle into her body and discovered that grief and rage, at sufficient depth, eventually stop feeling like different things and become a single current, cold and directional. The specific force of a woman who has reached the absolute bottom of what a human being can do to another human being, and found, at that bottom, not collapse, but the particular stillness of someone who now understands the full scope of what she is doing, and why. She called Marsh. "I'm sending you something," she said. "Look at it before you proceed upstairs." She forwarded the document. Marsh was quiet for 4 seconds. "Where did this come from?" "Unknown sender. The number is untraceable. Someone has been holding this and chose tonight to release it." "This changes the investigation category." "I know." "Vanessa." Marsh's voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Something careful and human underneath the professional precision. "Are you all right?" It was such a simple question. It was the question people asked when they did not know what else to say and were genuinely trying to say something. Vanessa looked at the lobby, at the doorman near the entrance who had looked away when she came through last night, at the street beyond the glass where the city was doing what it always did at night, burning, indifferent, honest. "No," she said, "but I'm standing." "That's enough for right now," Marsh said. "Go home. Let me work." She went to the Hale house, not because it felt safe, not because she wanted the comfort of familiar rooms. She went because her father's desk was there, and the notebook, and the east window that looked out at growing things, and she needed to be in the place where he had done the work of trying to protect her, because that was the only place where the weight of what she now knew felt like something she could carry rather than something that was going to put her through the floor. She sat at the desk. She opened the notebook to the last entry. Her father's handwriting, small and precise. The handwriting of a man measuring words against available space, and the last lines he had written were not about the case, not about the documents, not about the trust provisions, or the transfer mechanism, or Damien Cross. They were about her. "I have built the best case I can. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if I've given her what she needs or only what I was able to. What I know is that she is stronger than she has been allowed to be for the past several years, and that the strength is not gone, only compressed, and that compression of that kind does not diminish what's inside. It changes the pressure, and pressure, if the vessel holds, becomes the very thing that drives what comes next. She will hold. I have watched her whole life. She will hold." She closed the notebook. She sat in the east-facing study in the dark for a long time and did not try to feel anything specific, only let what was there be there. The grief of it, the specific texture of loving a man she had never been able to fully reach while he was alive, and understanding now that his greatest act of love had been this: not telling her what to do, but building her the evidence and trusting her to know when to use it. The compression of that kind does not diminish what's inside. She had been compressed for 5 years, shaped small, sized to fit a relationship that required her not to be too much, not to ask too clearly, not to look too directly at the things that would have broken the arrangement by being seen. She was done being compressed. At 2 in the morning, Marsh called. Dr. Crane's license was suspended 18 months ago for an unrelated matter, she said. We have him. The payment record ties directly to the Cayman sub-account. Combined with the letter, we have sufficient basis to add a charge that goes well beyond fraud. A pause. Damian Cross was taken in for questioning at 9:45. He has not spoken without counsel present, which is his right. But Vanessa, his lead attorney, has already been in contact with my office about cooperation terms. He's going to try to deal. Will you deal? Not on the charge that concerns your father. That one goes to a full trial. Marsh's voice was entirely steady. I want you to know that. She closed her eyes briefly. Thank you. The Hale stake will be formally restored to the trust pending the outcome. Your father's estate attorneys have been notified. Fen is coordinating. Another pause, shorter. Marcus came in voluntarily at 11. He provided a full statement. She had not expected that. She sat with it. He came in on his own, she said. Yes, his attorney was present. He cooperated fully, including on the Crane document, which he says he was not aware of. The fraud conspiracy, he knew. The share mechanism, he knew. The physician, he says he did not know, and the evidence so far supports that. A careful beat. What you choose to do with that distinction is yours. What you choose to do with that distinction is yours. She thought of Marcus at 12 years old, his hand on the back of her bicycle seat, his voice saying, I've got you. She thought of Marcus in the corridor with his coat on. She thought of the recording, his voice calm and calibrated. She's been managed for 5 years, and she thought of him coming in voluntarily at 11, without being compelled, without waiting to see which way the legal current ran. She did not forgive him. Not tonight. Forgiveness was not a thing that happened in a single motion. It was a long, slow process, more like the work of the East Garden in winter, underground and invisible and entirely unglamorous, and she was nowhere near the beginning of it yet. But she noted what he had done. She let it be noted and set it aside for the time when she had the capacity to look at it fully. The next months were not clean or triumphant in the way that public narratives about justice tend to be in the telling. They were granular and exhausting and full of legal machinery that moved at its own pace regardless of the human urgency attached to it. There were depositions and filings and counterfilings, and a week in November when Damian's new legal team attempted to introduce evidence that the Fen documentation had been improperly obtained, a motion the court dismissed, but which cost Marsh 3 weeks of additional work, and Vanessa 3 weeks of sitting with the specific anxiety of watching something real be challenged by something technical. The Hale stake was formally restored in October. Priya Das supervised the full audit of the Callaway Bridge extraction. The number, the total taken from the Hale dividend yield across the years of the arrangement, was made part of the public record and was significant enough that 3 financial publications ran it as a front-page item, and 2 institutional investors who had been with Cross Industries for more than a decade withdrew their positions within a week of the disclosure. Roland Vane's holding company was named as a co-conspirator in December. The Cayman sub-account was frozen by federal order. The board seats he had been positioned to receive through the marriage transfer were never taken. Dr. Elliot Crane cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony was the clearest single piece of evidence regarding what had been done to Thomas Hale, and it was delivered in a courtroom in January in the specific flat language of a man who had made a calculation 4 years ago that he now understood to have been the worst decision of his professional life. And Vanessa sat in that courtroom and listened to every word and did not look away. She owed her father that much. To hear it completely, to not manage the hearing of it the way she had managed so many other unbearable things, by finding the angle from which it was survivable. Some things were not survivable in that sense. Some things had to be gone through rather than around. And the going through did not leave you the same, but it left you with the actual knowledge of what had happened rather than the version of it you had constructed to make it bearable. And the actual knowledge, however terrible, was something you could build on. The trial date for the primary charges was set for the following spring. In February, Vanessa Hale filed the incorporation documents for a new company. Its name was Phoenix Holdings, and its primary asset was the Hale family stake in Cross Industries, now fully restored and legally protected by a restructured trust provision that Marsh had helped design. The secondary asset was the boutique design consulting firm she had kept deliberately small for 5 years. She stopped keeping it small. She hired Priya Das as chief financial officer. She brought Carter Reese in as an analyst. She called Esther in Budapest, not to commission anything, just to talk, because Esther was one of the few people in her life who had measured the actual shape of her and built accordingly, and she needed more of that in the people around her. Esther answered in her direct way, without preamble. "I heard about the dress." "Yes." "Good," Esther said. "Just that." "Marcus called in March." She answered. They talked for 40 minutes in the specific, careful way of people who are navigating a relationship that has been fundamentally altered and are trying to determine what, if anything, remains structurally viable. It was not comfortable. It was not resolved. She did not tell him it was fine, because it was not fine, and she had spent enough of her life telling people things were fine when they were not. But she listened. She let him speak. She said what was true, which was that she did not yet know what this was going to be, and that not knowing was the honest answer, and she was done with the other kind. He said, "I know, I'm sorry. I know that it doesn't fix it," she said, "but it's a place to start from." They left it there. The Phoenix brand launched in April. Not a fashion house exactly, something harder to categorize than that. A design and consulting firm with a luxury goods arm that had emerged from the particular experience of a woman who had spent 5 years keeping herself small and was no longer interested in designing anything for that purpose. The launch event was in a gallery space in the Meridian district, the same neighborhood where the Ardent Tower stood, which was deliberate in a way she did not explain to reporters because she did not think explanations were required. Some choices were self-evident if you understood the full arc of what had led to them. The wedding dress collection was called Phoenix. 12 pieces, each one designed in consultation with Esther, each one built, as Esther had always insisted wedding dresses should be built, for the actual shape of the woman wearing it, including the shoulder that sat slightly higher than the other, including the specific way the lungs expanded under pressure, including the fear. Especially the fear. A reporter from a financial publication asked her, at the launch, whether the collection was a message to Damien Cross. She looked at the reporter. She thought about the question. She thought about the dress on the floor of the private suite, the seed pearls scattered on marble. She thought about Esther's cold fingers and the 43 fittings and the hotel notepad drawing she had made at 1 a.m, drunk on something she had believed was happiness and which had been real. That part had been real, the happiness, the sketch pad, the night. Even if the man across the table from her had not been, she thought about her father's notebook, the last lines, the compression that does not diminish. She thought about what it had cost, all of it. Not just the 5 years of the relationship. The 5 years were recoverable, had been recovered, were now incorporated into the architecture of what she had built. She meant the other cost, the one that did not appear in any legal filing or financial audit. The specific price of discovering that the people you trusted most were capable of things you had not believed possible, and that the discovery does not destroy you, but it does permanently alter the landscape of what you are capable of trusting, and you have to learn to live in that altered landscape, and the learning is slow and unglamorous and does not come with a ceremony. She thought about the East Garden in winter, doing its underground work with no audience and no guarantee of spring. "No," she said to the reporter. "The collection is for the woman who has to get dressed in the morning after the worst year of her life. That's who I designed it for." She turned back to the room. The gallery was full. The 12 dresses were on their forms in the late afternoon light, each one catching it differently, and people moved among them with the specific quality of attention that beautiful things earn when they are also true, when the beauty is not decorative but structural, when you can feel in the making of the thing that it was built around something real. She stood near the east-facing window. She had chosen the gallery partly for the east-facing windows, a preference she had not examined too closely because some things were best honored without dissection, and watched the room. Ben was near the entrance, talking to a woman from the estate attorney's office. Priya was at the back with Carter and two people from the consulting firm's new roster. Marsh was not there. She was in trial preparation, had sent a handwritten note that Vanessa kept, not for sentiment, but for the specific quality of Marsh's handwriting, which was as precise and unambiguous on personal correspondence as it was on legal documents. She looked at the dresses. She thought, this is what remains after the burning. Not ash, something harder, something that could only have been made by going through the temperature of it and not going under. There were people in the room who had been at the Cross Gala 8 months ago. She could identify 3 of them, present now at her launch, and the specific quality of their attention was different from the attention they had given her when she was Damian Cross's partner of 5 years. That attention had been the attention reserved for an extension of someone else's power. This attention was its own thing, direct, evaluative. The attention people give to something that has proven it exists on its own terms. She did not perform for it. She did not manage it. She let it be what it was. A camera flash went off near the center of the gallery. A reporter photographing the 3rd dress in the collection. A piece that had no embellishment, no seed pearls, no elaborate construction, only the specific architecture of a garment built to fit the body's actual shape, including the parts the body was ashamed of, including the asymmetries and the places that had been injured and healed badly, and the places that carried weight that would never fully release. She had named that one simply. After. Not before. Not the promise of something coming. After. The specific landscape on the other side of the worst thing, where you found out what you were actually made of, now that everything constructed around you had come down. She looked at it in the gallery light and thought of her father's handwriting. She will hold. I have watched her whole life. She will hold. She had held. Not without cost. Not without the permanent alteration of the landscape of trust. Not without the months of granular legal work and the deposition rooms and the January courtroom and Marcus's voice on the recording and all of it, the whole exact temperature of it, endured rather than managed, because managing was the thing she had been doing for 5 years, and it had kept her inside a structure that was designed to contain her. She was done with structures designed to contain her. Damian Cross, on the day of her launch, was in pretrial proceedings. His company was in receivership. His board had resigned in November in a single collective action that the financial press had called the most complete collapse of institutional confidence in a private company in the city's recent history. The apartment they had shared had been sold to satisfy creditor claims. The Ardent Tower was under new management. She did not think about him often. When she did, it was without the particular ache she had expected. The ache of 5 years being revealed as a construction, as a carefully maintained fiction. That ache had been real, and it had done its work, and it had passed, the way genuine grief passes when you let it, rather than managing it, leaving not nothing but something else. A specific and permanent knowledge of her own capacity to survive the exact truth of her own life, without requiring it to be something other than what it was. That was the thing she had not known she was building toward. Not the company, not the dresses, not the legal case, or the restored trust, or the Phoenix brand, or any of the visible architecture of what her life was now. The knowledge. The metabolized, body-level knowledge that she could withstand it. That the worst version of things, the most complete betrayal, the deepest excavation of everything she had trusted, had come, and she had stood in it, and she was standing still. She walked through the gallery. She stopped at the last dress. The 12th. The one at the end of the collection, near the east windows, in the late afternoon light. This one had seed pearls, arranged in the pattern she had sketched on hotel notepad paper at 1 a.m. years ago, drunk on something she had believed was happiness. Esther had kept the original sketch, had asked Vanessa, when they began designing the collection, whether she wanted to use it. She had said yes without hesitating, not because it was Damian's dress, not because she was reclaiming it from him or reassigning its meaning or any of the gestures that would have been about him, because the sketch was hers. The happiness she had felt drawing it at 1 a.m. had been real, had existed in her, had come from her, and the fact that the context of it had been false did not make the thing itself less true. She had been genuinely happy in that moment. She had genuinely loved something. That love had been placed badly, invested in a man who did not merit it and could not hold it, but the love itself had not been a mistake. The capacity for it was not a weakness. She had rebuilt around the capacity, not away from it. The seed pearls caught the light. She stood in front of the 12th dress and breathed. Slowly, the way Esther had always told her, accounting for the fear, because a life built well had to account for fear, or it would never sit right on the body. And outside the east windows, the city was doing what it did, burning with 10,000 lights, every one of them the evidence of something alive. A journalist nearby raised a camera. She did not pose. She did not arrange her expression. She simply stood in the light with her father's capacity for careful work and her own hard-earned knowledge of what she was made of, and let the camera find her the way the truth eventually finds everything. Not by force, not by performance, but by simple, patient, absolute persistence. Some things, she thought, must burn before they become beautiful. She had burned. She was beautiful now in the specific way that things are beautiful after fire. Not delicate, not ornamental, not designed to be looked at from a comfortable distance. Structural, load-bearing, built for the actual weight of an actual life. She turned from the window. She walked into her own room, among her own people, in the company she had built from the wreckage of everything false, and she did not look back.